Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much, Leigh Habegger, for joining us today. Leigh is the Executive Director of Seafood Harvesters of America, a national commercial fishing organization representing 22 diverse regional fishing organizations from Alaska to Hawaii, California, Texas, and Maine. So truly most of the United States. Seafood Harvesters works to advance science-based policies and regulations that support sustainable fisheries. Leigh has spent most of her adult career working in Washington, D.C., where she started working for Congressman Shelley Pingree as a Knauss Fellow, and then for other marine-related organizations where she gained extensive experience in fisheries management, coastal restoration, and ocean policy. Leigh is also an avid sport fisherman and has fished all over the country. I've seen her photos. She is very skilled. I never want to go toe-to-toe with you. You've fished in remote parts of Alaska and the Gulf of Mexico's open ocean. Your passion really indicates, Leigh, for recreational fishing. It gives that credence to your kind of holistic understanding of marine resource management. I will also attest that I have been there with Leigh in Alaska. She loves putting on her extra tufts and getting slimy on the back deck. You've, I think, commercial fished and spent some time on boats in Alaska, Rhode Island, Gulf of Mexico, and in the South Atlantic. So I will also, full transparency for our viewers and readers, say that having worked with Leigh and being lucky enough to call her a very good friend, I can attest she is one of the smartest people in fisheries issues nationwide. She represents the go-to fishermen's organization based in our nation's capital, and she is the go-to resource on commercial fishing issues in the country, or one of them. And so thank you very much for being here today, Leigh. Where are you zooming in from, and when is the next time you're going fishing?
Well, thanks, Brett. Those are some very kind words, and I appreciate them. I am currently zooming in from the bustling metropolis of North Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Since the pandemic, like you said, I relocated down to North Carolina, potentially temporarily, trying to maybe figure out if I'm going back to DC once things open back up. But here for the long weekend, hopefully going to enjoy some salt water and some sand. And actually one of our members owns a seafood house and fishes out of Murrells Inlet, South Carolina, which is just south of where I currently am. So the weather's been a little bit off. It's been stormy and it's very foggy today. The sun is coming in the window, but it's reflecting off a whole bunch of fog. But I'm hoping that I'll be able to get out on Monday with Chris Conklin and hopefully do some inshore fishing. We probably won't go further than 10 miles offshore. So. And
what's in season right now?
I think we'll hit maybe some sheep's head, some drum. Snapper will be too far offshore. I think the weather's just not great for that. So hopefully get some sheep's head, or maybe some drum.
Fun. Yeah, you got to go with what the weather gives you.
Yep.
So besides that question, we also really like to start with the difficult questions first, Leigh. And so, as commercial fishermen ourselves, we're really looking forward to soon diving into some fishery related policies that you've been working on lately. But like I said, first, tough question first, what is your favorite seafood to eat and how do you prepare it?
Oh man, that is such a great question. I think I'm going to have to stay true to my Southeastern roots here and probably go with flounder. I love to cook it in a pan with a little bit of butter, garlic, lemon juice, and salt and pepper. It's just delicious. But I will also say that it is very hard to beat a fried flounder sandwich after a day on a boat. That is like just a refreshing, delicious meal. But when I was up in Alaska a couple years ago, I had the best salmon salad of my life. It was out on I was out on a boat with one of our members, and one of their deckhands mixed up some salmon salad for lunch, and it was so simple and so fresh. just delicious. And it's just, it is hard to beat fresh Alaskan salmon. So I don't know,
But
maybe a toss up between flounder and salmon.
but you're sticking to your roots. You're sticking to what you grew up fishing, and
Yep.
flounder, and you said flounder, especially after a day on the water, is especially satisfying.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Some people might not like a fried sandwich after all that, but it's delicious. I don't know.
That's great. Well, thanks for sharing. I can attest, I mean, some of the best salmon that you can have is the simplest. It's just the freshest, and it's not overly doctored up. It's just exactly kind of what came out of the water. So I'm glad you got to have a real kitchen sink, galley sink table, it sounds like, when you were in Alaska. That's
Yep.
great. So moving to now some of the more meaty subjects, or different types of meat. Let's talk about the cornerstone of U.S. federal fisheries management, the Magnuson-Stevens Act. Last year, Congressman Huffman, as we know, introduced the Sustaining America's Fisheries for the Future Act, which a bill that would reauthorize MSA. What proposed MSA updates is Seafood Harvesters of America tracking?
Yeah, great question, Brett. I think first it's good to remember that amid all of these reauthorization efforts, past, present, and potentially future, that Magnuson is working. This piece of legislation has resulted in significant progress for the fishing industry and for our ocean. And any changes that might be made to this piece of legislation, our federal overarching fisheries law, should not undermine the strides and advancements that have been made thanks to this law. So right now, like you said, there's ongoing debate about an MSA reauthorization proposal in the U.S. House of Representatives. It is critically important for the fishing and seafood industry stakeholders to be aware of this discussion, to engage with their members of Congress as they see appropriate. There are proposals, or there's language in this MSA reauthorization proposal that makes some big changes and some small changes that could impact the industry in a variety of ways. I would encourage fishermen and other folks throughout the seafood supply chain who could be affected by some of these changes to participate in that dialogue and provide their perspective and the feedback on the changes being proposed. I think there are a lot of changes that Mr. Huffman is proposing. And so I don't know that it's a long list. So we could probably spend the next 2 hours talking about it. But I would encourage fishermen and the seafood industry to take a look at the bill, look at the proposed changes, and if they see something that's going to impact their operations, get involved. Mr. Huffman has been very open and willing to hear from all corners of the industry and stakeholders. So it's a great opportunity.
It's a good opportunity to talk about the importance of seafood, to your business, to your operation, to your livelihood, no matter where you are in the seafood supply chain. It's a way to bring yourself to the table and just inform Congress how important seafood is to the American economy, especially, in light of the impacts and the positive impacts, frankly, that the pandemic has had on the seafood industry, right? The seafood industry is experiencing some record sales, across the supply chain, and ensuring that staff, congressional members understand how important just seafood is to their business and operation is a really great opportunity. Have you seen the supply chain more engaged at all lately on fisheries and seafood issues, just in general, not just Magnuson, but has there been more attention on seafood through the pandemic and other policies? And have you been able to kind of identify at all anywhere where the seafood supply chain has been active?
Yeah, that's a good question, Brett. I think we're seeing, I think, more attention on IUU fishing and labor issues, larger trade issues, H-2B visa issues. Like there are, I think, as more people get involved, some of these issues are are becoming more part of the mainstream conversation. And I think there are a lot of challenges that we face as an industry across the globe. And so it's good to have these conversations. I think we have seen a lot of the seafood industry start focusing on telling our success story. I think here in the US, like together with our management system, US fishermen have helped lead the world in sustainability. And that's a really big deal. And we're really proud of that. I always say to people who ask me when they find out what I do, like, oh, well, what seafood is safe to eat, or what should we be eating? And I always respond, if it's US caught, you can feel good about it. It's safe, it's sustainable, and period. So, we've rebuilt more than 40 stocks and continued to increase that number. We're deploying electronic monitoring systems to improve our accountability. We're continuing to re-engineer our gear to address bycatch issues. We're in this game. We have a stake in it, and we're doing really good work. And I think, there's always a question, like, can we do more? Of course. There's always more to be done. But I think as more Americans are starting to eat seafood and more people voice their desire for sustainable products, we have a great story to tell nationwide, and we'll continue to try to improve on that.
Eloquently said, but bottom line, buying American means buying sustainable.
Yep, exactly, Brett.
So you have kind of talking about the pandemic and the ways in which it's impacted various policies and activity on the Hill around seafood and aid in general. Seafood Harvesters of America has been leading the fishing industry nationwide and advocating for relief funds and effective policies related to COVID-19 for fishermen, but also as well as the seafood supply chain. I know you were really active on the Restaurants Act, restaurants being a critical component of who we supply and sell our seafood to, and having consumers have access to enjoying delicious wild caught US seafood. So what are things looking like pandemic wise for fisheries and the supply chain now that we're getting closer to the busy summer fishing season?
Yeah, I think our operations will likely forever be changed thanks to COVID. I think there is a general shift in thinking that we're not going to necessarily beat COVID, but we're going to figure out how to safely live with it. 2 years into COVID, I think the fishing industry has learned how to adapt, how to stay safe, how to keep our crews safe, how to keep processors or people who work in processing plants safe. But really how to get back to doing the thing that we love to do, which is fishing. We want to be out there on the water. We take pride in supplying sustainable seafood for Americans. And so, we've adapted, we've changed, but we want to get back out there fishing. And I think we're seeing a lot of folks do that. The COVID relief funding that was appropriated by Congress in the early days, thanks to the CARES Act, and then in an appropriations bill at the end of 2022 was incredibly helpful. It allowed us to make those adaptations to our operations. It also helped cover a lot of the revenue losses that disappeared. Our revenue disappeared, demand disappeared overnight as restaurants closed, as people stuck to their homes. So that was really critical funding. And we're really grateful to Congress for recognizing our need and appropriating those funds. On the restaurant front, we need our restaurants. We love them. We want them to succeed. The Restaurant Revitalization Fund is an initiative that the Independent Restaurant Coalition has been extremely active on, leading the way. That's an important program that was set up by Congress that has provided critical funding for restaurants to cover similar costs, similar expenses, that we experienced, like PPE, how to keep their workers safe. A lot of restaurants had foodstuffs on hand and more stuff coming in that as restaurants shut down, they had to figure out how to pay for. They didn't have customers coming in, and so the restaurant revitalization fund has been really critical in helping restaurants get back on their feet. And we hope Congress continues to support that program and provide funding for restaurants. Brett, like you said, many Americans, many folks around the world enjoy their seafood at restaurants. They play a very important role in seafood access for many Americans. And we want to make sure that they're able to stick around for the long term. They're our partners, and they are the place that a lot of folks get their seafood.
It's like an entry point, if you're not comfortable making it yourself or you want to try something different, Americans turn to restaurants as a way to kind of access new and different seafood, or if they just don't want to flat out cook it themselves, which, let's be honest, is probably more of us than we want to admit. And I believe that you penned, was it 4 op-eds last year with the Independent Restaurant Coalition, urging Congress to provide those pandemic relief funds to restaurants. I think I saw one in San Francisco, was it Alaska, maybe somewhere in the New England. Did you find that partnership successful between commercial fishermen and restaurants?
Yeah, we penned 4 op-eds together. I partnered with chefs in a handful of different regions, like you said, San Francisco, Alaska, New York, and up in Maine. I do think those op-eds resonated. I think there's a natural partnership between the commercial fishing industry and the restaurant industry. We were both trying to advocate for our own needs, but it was a very natural partnership. And I think our asks complemented each other very well.
Which we've seen that we don't have to go into them, but in various kind of federal policies or even Fishery Management Council policies where chefs, restaurateurs, restaurant trade organizations have been fairly active in, of course, supporting their interests, but recognizing that the interest of commercial fishermen having access to wild caught seafood is their entry point to have access to cook it and sell it. And so we've seen quite a bit of that, over the time that you and I have worked together, and it's a great partnership, and we hope to see more of that. So I'm glad and compliment you on that partnership and getting those pieces placed. That's a pretty big geographic scope. So moving from the pandemic, there's a lot of other things happening in Congress. Sometimes it doesn't feel like a lot is happening, and sometimes it does. But there's quite a few pieces of legislation moving at the federal level that could impact the seafood supply chain. You've got Build Back Better Act, 30 by 30 initiative, the current kind of aquaculture opportunity area process that NOAA is engaging on, and the Young Fishermen's Development Act, which, by the way, call out, and we will put a link in our blog. You and the president of Seafood Harvesters of America, a good friend of both of ours, Chris Brown, penned an op-ed in The Hill urging Congress, and making sure that the program was funded within the greater congressional funding package. And so I want to compliment you on that as really supporting the next generation of fishermen. So bravo to you, and thank you for the leadership there. What other policies does Seafood Harvesters feel are most critical to weighing in on right now, and some of the ones maybe I just mentioned?
Yeah, I think obvious by your question, Brett, there is a lot going on the Hill these days, and whether pieces of legislation are getting signed into law or not, there is a lot going on. And Harvesters is committed to working with key congressional staff and relevant agencies to stay involved in these conversations and dialogues, to represent our members' perspectives on these issues. And so I'll just touch on a few here today. You mentioned a lot, so I'll touch on some of those and then maybe add a couple. So the 30 by 30 effort is still alive and well. And the next opportunity to weigh in is on March 7th through a Federal Register comment period on the MPA Atlas. So NOAA and Department of Interior are curious what existing conserved areas should be included in that atlas. So in other words, what conservation measures currently exist for parts of the ocean and parts of terrestrial land that would make these areas qualify as already contributing to 30 by 30. So they're trying to just basically figure out an inventory of what exists and should it count towards 30 by 30 or not. So harvesters will be commenting and supporting the existing work that councils are doing, that they have done, and the conservation measures that they have put into place to protect fish, marine mammals, sensitive habitat, and other parts of our ocean. So, as Harvesters has said throughout our work on the 30 by 30 campaign, council should be at the heart of any 30 by 30 effort. They have the knowledge, the expertise, the long sort of institutional knowledge of fisheries management and what's happening in our ocean. So 30 by 30 is out there. I would encourage any fishermen or seafood industry stakeholders to weigh in on this comment period, and also then to stay active on 30 by 30. This has the potential to be really good for ocean health and also complement commercial fishing industry. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And so we are working hard on making sure that our perspective is heard. And we would encourage other fishermen and seafood industry folks to also make their voices heard.
And you made a really good point there, that the council process, which is a public, transparent, science-based management body, and eight fishery councils around the country, getting that expertise and that input is critical for any federal policy to move forward that impacts commercial fishermen. And have you seen the council process and the council expertise be included in kind of maybe like a new industry like aquaculture or wind? Is that expertise being properly captured and utilized in those developments of those industries?
Well, I think you read my mind, because my next 2 points were going to be on offshore wind and offshore aquaculture. But to answer your question, I think we have seen the aquaculture opportunity area work that NOAA has undertaken over the last couple years really do a great job of involving councils and the fishing industry perspective, sort of more writ large. I would say there's probably still work to be done on the offshore wind front. I think everybody understands that offshore wind has the potential to affect fishing grounds. And so as a result of that, the harvesters and a number of other fishing organizations are actively engaged with the Hill, with NOAA, with BOEM, to try to mitigate any impacts of offshore wind energy development on fisheries. I think, is it realistic to ask to mitigate them all? Probably not. But we're going to stay actively engaged in this area and represent our industry as best we can. I think both offshore wind and aquaculture represent opportunities for both the fishing and seafood industry stakeholders to get involved, have their voice heard. I think, Brett, you almost said this at the beginning of our conversation, but as we often like to say in our industry, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And so we need to stay at the table on this and not end up on the menu. On the menu
that serves delicious, tasty salmon salads and fried flounder sandwiches.
Yes, exactly.
That's the menu that we want to be on.
Exactly.
So a quick question just to follow up. NOAA's AOA process, the Aquaculture Opportunity Area process, has been very robust. As commercial fishermen ourselves and working with others in the commercial fishing industry, frankly, it's been very impressive at the level of thoroughness and detail that NOAA has kind of embarking on to at least provide kind of their roadmap in where aquaculture companies can look to as places where potential aquaculture facilities can operate best. But there really still is no teeth to sort of those AOAs being the end all be all. That is to say that really the the decisions don't ultimately lie with NOAA on where these are exactly getting permitted. It's sort of like a best practices recommendation. Do you feel like that process has been thorough in your experience? And in the two AOAs that NOAA has identified, do you agree with some of the conclusions of where they're finding aquaculture to potentially be cited best?
Yeah, so I mean, Brett, you mentioned this, the AOAs will serve as sort of pre-identified areas where NOAA believes offshore aquaculture could reasonably coexist with minimal conflict with other ocean uses, whether that be military, whether that be fishing, whether that be shipping, protected areas, what have you. So importantly, AOAs are important to note, AOAs do not permit any offshore aquaculture. It is just sort of a siting exercise. I think what we experienced through the siting exercise was very, very thorough. I think it was clear that the commercial fishing industry was being listened to. Changes were made that reflected some of our input. We were brought along throughout the process. It was a very transparent process. We had specific commercial fishing industry meetings with the folks leading the AOA process. And that was, I think that was a really good start. I think there are discussions and debates and dialogues happening in DC around offshore aquaculture. And I think commercial fishermen, but also the larger seafood supply chain, right?
Right. They're being very active too.
Right. They need to continue to pay attention and engage in those conversations. Aquaculture may make sense in some areas, but not others. Fishermen may want to adopt, have that as a way to diversify their fishing portfolio in some areas, and they really might not like that in other areas. And I think to sort of wrap up into this, I think there's an opportunity to really tackle the issue of working waterfronts here as well. So as we start thinking about deploying offshore aquaculture, potentially ramping up offshore aquaculture, are there opportunities to sort of preserve and build back up some of the lost waterfront infrastructure that we've lost over the years, processing capabilities, ice houses, fuel docks, marinas? I think there is a way for this to coexist. And I think there is some really great work being done on aquaculture. And, I think we look forward to continuing to work with NOAA on future AOA processes, and continuing to work with Congress as they try to figure out a permitting scheme for offshore aquaculture.
Leigh, your perspective is frankly so refreshing, because as kind of quote younger people in the seafood fisheries world, speaking frankly, I find it exhausting, this us versus them historical mentality that permeates across kind of industries who depend on the ocean. And it's refreshing to hear your perspective on finding some solutions and identifying key gaps that still exist, and pointing to good actors in the government. From what I'm hearing, NOAA's AOA process as an example of a forward-thinking, inclusive process that really listens and then uses that information and actually incorporates it, not just listens and checks the box. And your ability as a leader to keep steering conversation in that direction where it's not us versus them, which is exhausting. That's more tiring than being uncomfortable but finding a solution. And so I just want to kind of applaud you on that mentality and thank you for giving that perspective and leading the harvesters with an incredible board who are also, as many of them I know well, forward thinking and solution oriented, but of course rooted in the commercial fishing industry, the backbone of coastal economies and working waterfronts. And so I just want to really take a second and recognize that. And I want to finish today just sort of with one kind of open-ended question. And this is along the lines of your support for the Young Fishermen's Development Act, and we'll put a link in our blog so people can read what you and Chris Brown said. But what have you kind of learned as a female leader within the next generation of fisheries policy experts? What have you learned, and maybe what advice do you have for others who are either working within the industry or hoping to?
Brett, I have so thoroughly enjoyed my time working in fisheries policy and really in particular working for the commercial fishing industry. I've made lifelong friends of all ages, young and old here. And I've met some of the hardest working, like truest, just really genuinely good people through this work. It has been an extremely welcoming community full of men and women who are excited to sort of see a younger crowd kind of with a passion for fisheries and who really want to work with this industry. I think oftentimes, like in grad school, did I ever think I was going to be like running a national organization of commercial fishermen? No, I didn't. I just didn't really think that was like a career path. And so I think as we start to see younger people come up into this industry, I'm really excited about the willingness of sort of some of these, the folks who have worked in the industry for so long, be excited, be willing to pass along their institutional knowledge. I can call up any of my board members who have worked in the fisheries industry for decades and get an hour-long conversation going about the context of a piece of legislation or a council action that happened before I was in the industry. So these people have invested in me, in my career, in me as a person, and I'm really honored to work for this industry. And I guess maybe my one piece of advice would be, anybody who wants to get into this industry, you get out of it what you put in. Like I have worked hard to learn about things that happened way before my time here. I mean, that is important context to have as we look forward to addressing some of these issues. Making connections, like I'll be frank, there were a couple people on this board that when I took this job, I was terrified of, and I was like, oh gosh. And they have turned out to be the kindest, most patient people who really want to see me and other young folks in the industry succeed. They want to know that when they retire, there are people to take over and make sure that our fisheries remain sustainable, that our fishermen retain access to their ability to go fish. So, you get in you get out what you put in, and there are people who want you to succeed here. And yeah, it's an honor to work for this industry, and I feel lucky that I get to get up and do it every day.
Well said. It's almost the same advice as a fisherman has. You can't catch fish with your net out of the water. And similarly, as a policy expert working in fisheries, you get out what you put in, and it does take that hard work, and it takes that grit. And you and I have been lucky enough to know each other now for almost a decade, being maybe young and naive fisheries runts in DC, pulling our own hair out, not knowing what we were totally talking about. But I just want to thank you for your time. It's been an honor to talk with you. And I know many of us, myself included, look up to you, and I hope others do too, as young leaders in the industry, and that there is career paths, very rewarding career paths, can be tough, but it definitely makes you stronger. And especially in an industry that does support the next generation, is very cognizant of the graying of the fleet across the whole line. And I would also agree. We have on the Ocean Strategies team really felt the impact of people wanting to help us learn. And so we've been really honored to have you here today, Leigh. For others who are listening, you can watch and read previous interviews with Arlen Wasserman from Changing Taste, Congressman Jared Huffman, of course, and other fishing leaders like Leigh Habegger herself. So Leigh, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Brett. It's been a joy.